So as you can see, I'm Gary. You were emailed, most of you, by Diane, my assistant. And we invited people in AONBs, national parks, and destination management organizations today. And this is, as I said earlier, mostly the UK group. The 6 p.m. one tonight is going to be an exact repeat. You are welcome to come back if you like, but it's going to be the same thing, mostly for American audiences. We've got one more person coming in from the waiting room, so we'll just give it a second and then we'll kick off. In the meantime, I'm just going to set up and get ready to go for you. We appreciate you giving up your time today, and we're going to give you some stuff that'll make it worthwhile and make it a valuable experience for you. So, the name of the game today is Astrotourism, which is something I've been involved in for a while. I do a lot of work with an AONB. While I don't work for one, I do a lot of collaboration with the North Pennines AONB, if you are one of the AONB people. If you're not, AONB stands for Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. It's kind of one down from a national park, usually in terms of size or other factors. And this is me. In fact, this is us. This is my company. I've been doing tours for about 6 years now. Started off as an astrophotographer, but now I do a bit of both. And that's one thing we're thinking of looking at for future free webinars, a guide to how you can take photographs of your own destinations fairly easily. In fact, I've just taken delivery of an iPhone 13, which promises to be pretty good for photographing the night sky. So I'll report back on that one. So I'm a trainer. I'm also a photography trainer and a science educator. I am a physics teacher by qualification, but more than that, I've been a university lecturer and all kinds of things over the years. So I was running a community observatory, the North Pennines Observatory, for a while. I was the director of that, running outreach events, and also we had an inflatable planetarium. In fact, the way that came up, if you've ever been in one of these, they are fabulous. They wear thin after a while when you've spent all day in a tent with large groups of people, large groups of school children, all of which I enjoy in small doses, but not trapped in a tent for the whole day. So I managed that for about 1.5 years, which must be some sort of record. But yeah, a huge 5-meter dome with a projector in, where we could show films about the night sky and do sky tours as well with planetarium software. Great fun. And I've been a major contributor to the North Pennines Stargazing Festival. In the first 2 or 3 years, I was more or less co-programmer of that. The last one that we were able to run completely offline 2 years ago, I was told afterwards I ran 17 of the events, and I still don't know how I did that. But it's a pretty busy festival, and it's coming up now. It starts tomorrow, actually. So I started out running landscape astrophotography workshops and events, and have played quite a part in the area, educating people on how to take photographs of the night sky. Moved on to running stargazing events when I realized there was a lot of demand for those, and we lived in a dark sky area. And did this in stages, really, made all of the mistakes pretty quickly. The first mistake was using village halls and community centres, which were chosen for partly for affordability, but mostly because we had access to them and there were loads of them in really dark places. But we soon realized, because nature dealt us this blow as it so often does when you organize something stargazing related, that the first one it chucked down, it was foggy. So we had problems with rain and fog like anybody does in the UK. It's just part of living here. But being in a village hall for 2 hours, regardless of the presentation quality, was not really an experience that I wanted for people. So I had to think more laterally about what was missing, what could be different. And this also includes the observatory, because I realized when we ran big events for 30 people, we had a nice telescope on a platform in a building, but at any given time, when we went outside, 29 people were queuing for a telescope. And if you've ever been to an observatory, you'll know what that's like. You're thinking, when is it my turn? Or occasionally, if it's got to you, they've had longer than me. How long should I spend on this? And it's not really the way forward. And actually, telescopes. When people ask me what first telescope should I buy, the answer is to get a pair of binoculars, because they're so much easier to use, you see more, and you become more familiar with the night sky. The analogy I use for a telescope is it is literally like looking at the sky through a drinking straw. You will see detail, but you'll not know where that detail is. So I like to train people up from naked eye observing to binocular, and then telescope only if and when they're ready for it. So I looked around for venues, and the one I settled upon for astrophotography at first, and this is one of my images, was High Force Waterfall. Some of you may know High Force or have heard of it. Biggest waterfall in England by volume. And occasionally when it rains, you get two of the biggest waterfalls in England, one on the right-hand side, then one on the left. When it gets really rainy, the entire River Tees comes over the top, and that is a spectacle. You can't see much of the night sky on those nights, but it is really worthwhile. And we find that people just like going down there. So this is lit on a very low level with an LED panel, which is what we do during events. This is a 13-second shot, so it appears much brighter than it actually is. We find a nice dim light on the scenery that doesn't affect the night sky, goes down really well with people, because even if it's cloudy, they get to enjoy the waterfall and take photographs of it. So that's our first provision for cloudy and rainy nights. Have something really special to go to with a little bit of a walk and something nice to see at the end of it. The site also has a boutique hotel and restaurant, in addition to being the biggest waterfall in the country. And it's right in the middle of a dark sky area. For those of you who have played with sky quality meters, I've clocked 21.6, 21.7 here on a scale of 22. So really dark as anywhere I've been to in the country. And also the cliffs block out any remaining light pollution. So even if there's something from 30 or 40 miles away, like a little bit of sky glow, you can't see it. So the beauty of this venue, apart from the waterfall, is you have cliffs and then pristine black sky on a clear night, of course. And started off by running one-off events, moved into the gift experience market, then things kind of blew up. And we started getting visitors from all over the country, like a lot of people from the home counties in the South Coast traveling just for these stargazing events, because it was something so different. So think about that if you run events. What do you have in terms of locations in the area you live in, which will be a draw in their own right, where people, when they imagine themselves looking at the night sky from that location, think, yeah, I want to do that. So before long, we were fully booked, meaning that in the season, which for us is about 6 months, every dark weekend, which is the ones when the moon wasn't up, I've since learned that people like seeing the moon, as Deborah's going to tell you in a moment, and we're going to expand that, but we were fully booked. That was 2020, and that year had other plans for all of us. So it required another rethink, lots of rethinks, because everything we did suddenly became illegal. It felt dangerous for a while to be in an illegal business, but everybody else was as well. We couldn't do group events, we couldn't do solo events. So we experimented with online formats. The first one, which was a bit of a mistake, but you know what? If you're going to make mistakes, make them early and make them, otherwise you won't learn anything. I started a virtual astronomy club with guest speakers. It kind of worked. The problem was, as I realized a bit too late, the people coming to it were just interested in looking at the night sky. And the speakers were more interested in the technical details of astronomy. But that was the first major learning point. It's not about astronomy, it's about stargazing. So I separate those two. I don't run astronomy events, I run stargazing events. People with an interest in astronomy are more than welcome to come, but it's made clear that it's for everybody. And after getting some experience with online events, we moved into virtual tours and got a deal with a company that has virtual telescopes sited in on Mount Teide in Tenerife and near Santiago in Chile by the edge of the Atacama Desert, two very dark areas. And pretty good fun, actually, that when it's clear, which it so often is in those venues, we can go over to a telescope, a choice of telescopes, and show people what they're looking at. And that really makes the experience. But even on a cloudy night, we make the presentations fun and informative and ideally mind-blowing. Because something I didn't tell you about me was, prior to all of this, I was a psychologist for quite a few years, a research psychologist. And for me, the dark sky experience is not about physics and maths, the astronomy. It's about inducing a state of awe and wonder in the audience and then taking them outside to just take that further. And that's the sort of thing that'll blow people's socks off. You're not trying to bog them down with facts. So we were able to open in 2020 in the summer, which was a fat lot of good. But we managed 2 nights of events. And actually, when they ground to a halt with the next lockdown, I was secretly pleased, because social distance, and even for 14 people at that waterfall, was a nightmare, health and safety wise. We did it, but we had to be real careful. So I did a lot of thinking again during lockdown periods and got together with some of the people I work with. and had to keep pivoting the business again and again and again to something different. And I don't know about you, but one of the good things of this lockdown period is just accumulating experience and having time to think. I would estimate that things have moved on about 10 years and 18 months because we didn't rest. We just kept at it and we kept trying things. So when we re-emerged spring this year, again, going into the light nights, but fair enough, we ran both online and real world events. We knew they were coming back in September, but had online courses and tours in the meantime. But the biggest insight by far, and we got this a little bit from the astronomy club, but other things as well, is that the minority of people are actually amateur astronomers. Actually, amateur astronomers and professional astronomers don't know a great deal about the layout of the whole of the night sky. Remember, they're looking through a drinking straw. So there's that as well. But the majority of people who take trips to dark sky locations and come to our events are not interested in astronomy. And by astronomy, I mean the science of astronomy. They want to look at the night sky. A lot of people became very introspective during lockdown. You know, Netflix had to run out eventually, and people thought a lot. They spent a lot of time with their loved ones because we had to. And they wanted to connect with something bigger, something outside themselves, something that took them away from their day-to-day lives. And what better to do that than the universe? Yes, a lot of people went for walks in the country, but at nighttime, everything opens up. So from late spring to early summer 2020, if you weren't aware of this, there was a huge surge in astronomy and stargazing. And we could see this. I'm part of a collective called Go Stargazing. If you're not a member, look them up on Facebook, look up the website, because there's loads of valuable information on Go Stargazing. And one of our videos, which was about the Starlink launches, the satellites, eventually got over 1 million hits. That's crazy. But it just showed you what was going on at the time. And I was doing Facebook ads for things and they were costing pennies as opposed to pounds. But also there was a huge demand for telescopes. This is the first thing people do when they want to get into stargazing, because they don't know where to start. They buy a telescope. And I'm sure that there are a lot of telescopes out there next to exercise bikes, even Peloton machines with clothes hanging on them. Because if you're brand new to stargazing, a telescope is too big a jump for most people. But the demand was so big that suppliers sold out in a matter of weeks. And the supply chain was completely ruptured between China and the rest of the world. China is the premier manufacturer of affordable telescopes at the moment. And it's still a problem, but it shows us just how many people got into the hobby. So there are people still now with an appetite to get outside, even though summer's coming to an end. We come into low season for most people, but low season for us is high season. And the thing I always say to people who are in the tourism sector, whether they are public bodies or whether they own a business, even an accommodation business, is that stargazing opens up the whole year. And for me, before I got into astrophotography and stargazing properly, I didn't like the winter. I used to like the warm months, and then I used to wish away the winter. But that's crazy. That's wishing away months of your life where there's so many interesting things to do in the UK. So it levels out the season. And that's one of the biggest attractions in the tourism sector for astrotourism. So now that people are heading outside again and starting to travel, what are they looking for? Well, for me, that's a rhetorical question. But for Deborah Slater, who I'm going to hand you over to now, it's been the focus of her life, of her research life for a few years now. Astrotourism, why people visit dark sky sites and what makes them tick. Over to you, Deborah.
Thanks, Garrett. Hi, everybody. I'm Deborah Slater. My research over the past 6 years or so has been primarily focused on the astrotourist and their experience of the night sky. And for me, it's been about experience. It's been about looking at what they want to get out of going outside and staring into the night sky. So I'm going to share my slides with you now. And as you can see, my name's Deborah Slater. I work for the University of Central Lancashire, and I work in the Department of Tourism, Hospitality and Events, which is in a much wider management school, a business school. And I focus primarily on delivering careers advice to students and looking at employment law and human resource management. But my research in astrotourism came primarily from the interest of living next to a dark sky park in Dumfries and Galloway. And I was fascinated by why the sky there was much darker than the sky in Blackburn, where I was born. And I wanted to find out about that. So I thought, right, okay, how do I find out? How can it be darker here than it is there? And I met a great guy called Keith Moore, who was the head of the Forestry Commission in Newton Stewart. And we had a long chat about the night sky. And he was really a pioneer in getting the first national dark sky park in Dumfries and Galloway recognised through the IDA, which we'll look at in a few minutes. So that's me, that's where I come from. I decided to do a PhD in the subject, and I wanted to look at what astrotourism actually is, but I really wanted to focus on the tourists themselves. So when I was putting together my PhD, I looked at astrotourism and I identified straight away that it's not space tourism. You say to people, oh, I've done a PhD in astrotourism, and immediately they think it's space tourism, but it's not. It's terrestrial tourism for me, and it's whereby people go to certain places on the planet that are dark and look up and gaze at the night sky. And they tend to do this in a dark sky place, and that's because the natural environment there really involves gazing beyond the horizon. Now, for most of you who may work in tourism, most tourists tend to focus their gaze below the horizon at a particular site or a venue, a monument, a theme park, an activity. But this activity looks beyond the horizon into our cosmos at different aspects of celestial phenomena. And really, that's the optimum place to look for various points in the night sky, particularly when it's dark and the conditions are at their highest, the most optimal. So dark sky tourism in the UK is accredited by the International Dark Sky Association. Many of the parks are, and I'm focusing on the UK because that's where I did my research. But there are now 5 dark skies parks in the UK, the first one being Dumfries and Galloway, but there are over 100 in the world, and America has the majority of them. And that's because the IDA is associated with America initially. We also now have 6 reserves, share an extended area of darkness, and 130 places where you can see the night sky or are designated dark places. Now, some of these places, you'd be surprised to learn, are in cities and towns, but they're places which do have lower than normal light pollution. So you might be near one of those, or you might be near a park or a reserve. Another body that is out there to protect the night sky is the Skylight Foundation. And these 2 bodies together look at ways of reducing light pollution. And light pollution is one of the most easy things that we as a population can reduce just by changing the wattage of a light bulb, making it more efficient, turning lights off. Light pollution can be eradicated. Unlike many other forms of pollution, which take generations to get rid of, light pollution is not that difficult. It just takes a mindful set to think about how we can reduce it and open up the night sky for us all to see. Because back in the Victorian times, everybody could see the Milky Way. Now, less than 4% of the population of the UK can see it, which is sad because they're missing such a lot, because the night sky is such a beautiful place to be. So when we look at dark tourism and we look at light pollution, we're thinking about issues related to sustainability, and we all know about COP21 coming up and how we need to focus on these issues of sustainability. And here, these are the sustainable goals that they promote. And for dark skies, we can look at nearly all of them, but the ones that we focus on are number 3, are good health and well-being, because it's a scientific fact that if the night is dark, we sleep better. So that's important. The other one is to do with number 13, which is climate action. And having darkness increases the wildlife population, and it stops them from getting confused about what is day and what is night. And many species are in decline because of man-made light. For example, moths. You all see moths going around a light fitting outside, and they're confused because really they would use other sources of natural light. So they get confused by that. Turtles as well. They navigate via the light. So if you've got shores lit up, they don't know where to go to drop their eggs and reproduce. And the babies don't know how to get into the sea because they can't see the light. So all these things impact not just on human beings, but on our ecosystem. And the other one is number 15, that's the main one. So life on land, as I say, in relation to our natural environment and our animal species. Now, as Gary rightly identified, astrotourism, many people believe it's just mainly for amateur astronomers. And from my research, I went to many of events. I still go to lots of different events, and identified that there is really 5 different types of astrotourist. They're the stellar explorers. These are the people that are interested in astronomy and science, and they're really quite passionate about measuring things, trying to identify new stars, looking for objects in the sky that they want to do more research on. So that's the stellar explorer. Then we have transtemporal individuals, and these people are really interested in space and time. So can we time travel? Is there the possibility to do that? And the reality is we do it by looking up, just by looking at the sun, or well, we shouldn't really look directly at the sun, but by looking at the moon. There's seconds of delay from the light that's transferred from the sun to the moon to then reach Earth. So thinking about that is a form of time travel. But they're probably more thinking about this popular culture and Doctor Who and Star Trek and the ability to time travel. But it's important for those people to understand, you know, the difference in time and distance between different planets and different stars. And then we've got the inquisitors. These were the most controversial group in my research, but the most fascinating for me. I really enjoyed meeting these people. And they tend to be more interested in spirituality, astrology, and extraterrestrial life. So they want to know, have people from another planet visited Earth? Does Area 50, is it 51? I can't remember, exist in America? Have we had visitors? Are there Martians? Have we seen them? So at events, they will ask these questions. And, you know, the simple answers that you can give to people are interested enough in themselves, but also the occult. Many people that came to the events, well, not many, a small minority really, were interested in witchcraft and warlocks, and they would look for fairies in the woods while we were stargazing, and that was their passion. And they believed they could only see them in dark places because fairies don't want to go somewhere where there's light. So we got so many different kinds of people there in the inquisitors section. Then we had our collectors, and these are people that want to go to different dark places to experience what it's like and to compare if where they live or where they've been before is any darker or any better. And some of the conversations that exist around that relate to the challenge and the excitement of seeing something new. So we call those the collectors, or I did. And then we have the socializers. And I found that this was the biggest group because this contained people that came with family and with friends, and they tended to buy the event as an experience, just as Gary's providing experiences to people. They purchased the tickets so that their loved ones could experience it. But the interesting thing about these people was, although they purchased the experience for a loved one, they seemed to get more out of it because they thought, oh, well, I'll buy it for my dad or I'll buy it for my husband because he likes it. And he did, I'm sure he did, or she did. But when they were there and they experienced it for themselves, they were awestruck because they thought, yeah, I understand now what this is all about. And I had lots of chats with ladies and men and small children about why they were there at the beginning of the night. And they seemed a bit despondent sometimes because it could be a bit cold. Obviously, stargazing in the UK takes place between September and March, so it can be a bit chilly, a bit damp. So they talk about, can we get some Prosecco? Is there any video games? What have you got on your phone? Can I have a look at an app? But once after maybe 10, 15 minutes, and they started to see the sky and it opened up to them, they absolutely loved it. And that was the important aspect for them. So when I created this typology, it was based purely on being with people. It wasn't an academic process of reading text. It was being there in their experience and taking that experience back to create this typology. And what they tended to do was they tended to stargaze. They tended to observe different things in the night sky. As Gary outlined, the moon was quite a primary driver for some of them, particularly an old lady that I met. She wanted to know why the moon had got bigger. It was bigger when she was younger. And she couldn't understand it. She said it was bigger then. Why is it not big now? And the rangers that were at the events explained all the technical detail. I'll be honest, I'm not a technical detail person. I'm not an astronomer. So I was fascinated by the responses as well, and why it was bigger at certain times of year and smaller. So there's so much to be learned from the moon. And she was fascinated by that and went on to do other events just directed towards the moon, not just at stargazing. Then we had our astrophotographers, and I admired them greatly because taking a photograph in the dark is very technical and I couldn't do it. But they tended to stay away from the main group because they wanted to set up their equipment. But we also have activities related to storytelling because lots of people, particularly the younger people, maybe the children in their teens, wanted to know about the Norse god, about Orion, about all the stories and the mythologies and legends that come with the stars. And that's something that's really fascinating for lots of people. And as I said, the main bodies that govern the protection of the night sky are the IDA, the IDA and the Starlight Foundation. And they all link to dark tourism in this way that brings the economy together, because in Dumfries and Galloway, when I was doing my research, over the winter, bed and breakfast providers saw an increase of 35% in occupancy during that period of time, which was great because normally many of them would shut down in the winter. So for them, that was a really good opportunity. Dumfries and Galloway isn't well known for its restaurants and bars. So we didn't see a great increase there, but definitely in bed and breakfast. The environment was enhanced and education was something that many people said they wanted from an event related to the dark skies. And that's why we tended to start the evening off with an hour presentation on what there was out there, what people might see, particularly if it was cloudy. If it was a really clear sky at the beginning and the forecast was that it was going to get a little bit worse as the night went on, we did it the other way around. But usually we started off the evening with a form of a presentation. And that was the educational aspect, as well as seeing when they went outside. And then the last bit is community, and jobs are generated in the community from astrotourism and from stargazing. And it also enhances the local community. Their health and well-being increased. There's less aspects of stress and sleep deprivation in dark areas because people can get that good night's sleep that they crave. So what do people actually want to know about stargazing? And what do they need to know? Well, fundamentally, I identified 5 things that people need. And the first one is that to take part in any astrotourism event or stargazing event, you just need your eyes. And we really encouraged people to go out into the dark and just look first, not to use any equipment, just to spend 10-15 minutes getting their eyes accustomed to the dark. Because once your eyes become accustomed to the dark, you can see more of the night sky. Think stars that you couldn't see before start to pop. And that moment when stars begin to pop is really interesting for people because, oh, I didn't see that before. Why is that? And that's because their eyes weren't accustomed to the dark. And the fact that it's also free, so they can leave the event and go home and do it once they've got an understanding and appreciation for the night sky, unless, of course, they live in a city where they might not be able to see very much. I work in Preston and there's very few stars. It's usually quite cloudy and there's not a lot you can see. So traveling to a dark sky is important. But the fundamental aspect of it is it's free and you just need your eyes. That's the first thing. Stargazers tended to ask, why is that star, that's really bright star there, what is it? And it was called Sirius, so it's our brightest star. Why is it brighter than the other ones? Why are they different colours? What does that mean? And they didn't really understand what a star was. So a star itself is a glowing ball of gas with a core that fuses hydrogen and helium. Some stars, like our star, the sun, has planets rotating around it, and others do not. So that's the main difference. So I tended to say, well, basically, it's very similar to the sun. And they appreciated that basic understanding. They didn't go into any technical detail, but we did give them images of different stars, just as I've done here. And these are the 16 brightest stars, and they're in order, starting with Sirius first and working its way down. If they wanted more technical detail, they'd come to the next session, because that would be more for amateur astronomers. But the introductory session was always for stargazing. And we would say that they've got different temperatures and they glow at different intensities, but not go into too much detail, because I tended to find at events that if you're not really into astronomy in any great detail, people switch off when you use big words and big numbers, and they can't really visualize it or conceptualize it in a meaningful way. So the way in which we did that was to look at different ways of illustrating it. So we might use a light fitting or a set of lights to illustrate some certain things to show the brightness and difference in brightness. Another thing that they needed to understand was the rotation of the planet, and our planet in particular, and this was fundamental 3. So how does Earth rotate and how it's inclined in its axis itself, the meaning of a day, the meaning of a year, the way it rotates around the planet, all those things people wanted to understand and say, well, is Australia get more light than England? Why is Reykjavik always in the dark at a certain time of year and always in the light at another time of year? So all those questions they wanted to ask. And yes, there were people there to give them those facts if they wanted them. Tended to be our amateur astronomers that were interested in finding out if we knew the answers to those, whereas the general public just want to know the basic details about the rotation and why we get more sun in spring than we do in summer, or why it's darker at certain times of year than it is. A fascinating insight for many people was to do with the moon. And as I said, with the elderly lady that I interviewed several times, because she came to many events about the moon, and other people as well wanted to know about the meanings of the waxing crescent and the waning gibbous, and they wanted to know what that meant. and why did that throughout the month, and what principles there were to lunar phases. So these were interesting facts again that people wanted, and why sometimes it does appear much closer than other times to do with the time of year. So some of these things, although fundamental, have really great significance for some people and less so for others. And it is because the moon is closer to Earth than other stars. And it's not a star, it's the moon, by the way. But it is closer to the Earth. But it is something that we can actually see. And the fifth fundamental was to do with where our planet sits in the universe. Now, I had many people asking about climate change and how long it would take us to travel to other Goldilocks planets. And the simple answer to that, after we've gone through a few aspects of the difference between Earth and Sun, 8 light minutes, Earth and Mars, 12.7 light minutes, etc., was realistically, in our lifetimes, it's very unlikely that we will ever be able to travel to another planet that can sustain us as human beings, because they're far too far away. The technology does not exist. And then the questions will come about terrestrial life and have they visited us, etc., etc. So all these things really create a sense of awe and wonder, because people really don't appreciate the tremendous difference between distance and space and how many galaxies we have. And by looking up, we can see all these different potential suns and all these galaxies and planets that are out there, but why can't we get to them? So where we sit in the universe was important, but it did really, as Gary outlined earlier, make them realise our significance on the planet, and that really we're less than a grain of sand on an enormous beach, and we're only here for a short period of time. And that creates that sense of significance, awe and wonder. So what actually do tourists want to see? Well, I found that many of them want to see the constellations. They want to know where they sit within that, because we're all born with a birth sign. And even some of the cynical astronomers, they all knew the birth sign, all of them. We would ask and they would all know. And they would talk about where their birth sign stood in the night sky, and the patterns that they created from the characters and the animals that they represent and the symbols, and how our ancestors used the night sky to navigate from place to place, how Columbus used it to go to various destinations, etc. So they looked at all these issues, and the main thing that they want to know is where is their birth sign. So they give that personal link towards the zodiac. And after they'd identified the zodiac signs, they would want to know other facts, such as Orion's belt. And we would always start off by saying where Orion's belt were, because it's easy once you've found Orion's belt to navigate to the basic stars in the sky. So that's what we would do. Look for the 2 brightest stars, tell them what they were, give them some really interesting facts about Betelgeuse, and they would be fascinated by that, because it is something that we can see in our night sky. And then we would look at other aspects of the night sky if they wanted to. But normally I found that once you'd covered the moon, Orion's belt, Betelgeuse, and Rigel, then they didn't really want to know anything else. They got too cold, wanted to go back inside. And that was the experience. Some of them would queue up to use a telescope. Many would use the binoculars, because we would always advise people using binoculars. But some, I think they didn't feel that they'd have the night experience if they hadn't looked through the telescope, even if they only looked through it for a minute. And as Gary said, some people got a bit upset if somebody was looking through it for longer than others. But that was only if it was a particularly cold night. We tended to find a little bit of dissatisfaction with the amount of time people had to queue. But if you had something else, such as an app that they could look at the stars with and the constellations, or a pair of binoculars, then they would be quite happy. So you had to have something for everybody. For the kids, we tended to have things like hot chocolate, so they could look at the equipment and then drink hot chocolate and eat marshmallows and things like that. It just kept them happy. And it's thinking about your customer base, isn't it, really? What do they want from the experience? And that's what we tend to focus on looking at astrotourism, because they are customers and they do want to experience things. So the useful things that we found was to have a laser pointer, and usually for stargazing it's green. We tended to point them to various objects in the sky, as I've just mentioned, so Orion's Belt, Betelgeuse and Rigel, and show them where they were. But we would always advise our participants that they have to be safety aware. You can't just go out and point a laser pointer anywhere you like. You have to be aware of flying objects. You don't want to blind a pilot and cause a catastrophe. So we would make it sound that dramatic, just to highlight the significance and the importance of being safety aware, and to turn them off when they weren't using them. And to be honest, we didn't normally let participants use the laser. It was just the sky rangers. We had sky rangers. We would also have the binoculars, because they're cheaper than telescopes and they're easier to use. But again, we advised if somebody wanted to buy a pair of binoculars, to make sure they're not too large, not too heavy, because your hands shake and you can't see anything if your hands are shaking. You've got to keep them quite still. So buy a small pair and try to navigate the night sky with those. And really, tourists love to look at textures on the moon, the different shades and shadows on the moon, so start there. And if they did want to buy a telescope, as Gary said, to look at maybe purchasing a reflective telescope, something that's a little bit cheaper than other forms of telescopes. And really, they can help you look at deep sky dark objects, but it's got to be something that you've tried to look at previously and want to investigate even further. And then we would finish off with some really cool space facts that we would tell people about. So the sun makes up 99.86% of the solar system mass. The sun's things like that. So why Mercury is named Mercury, etc. So we would give them these little tidbits, and we would also then highlight the future events, and they would be usually related to these issues. We had events related to distance, and we get people outside with string and bowls and oranges, looking at sizes of planets, and people love to participate in things when they're buying an experience. And all these cool facts help them to appreciate what was coming next, and that they wouldn't be coming back to see the same event again. They could book on another event and get a different experience, more focused to something that they've just found out they want to know more about. So that's basically my research looking at the astrotourism experience. I did a lot of research in this area, and we could look at senses and the allure of the destination from a point of view of its wanderlust, etc. But the main thing for me was the tourist experience. So thank you.
Okay, I think we've got time for questions. Let me just say briefly before we do that we have a lot of information that we want to get across to people. We just felt we were holding on to valuable stuff, and it was time to share some of it. So as I said earlier, I think I might do one soon on astrophotography, which will help some people get started photographing venues. And as I mentioned in the initial email, those of you who've come through the AONB National Park kind of route, I'd like to put an online summit together, which is, I'm planning for that to be free, to be freely available, and for people to watch it for free on the day it happens. Whether I've got time to put something together in November, I don't know, but you have our email address, and you can email me if you'd like to take part in something like that, if you have an idea for a talk. But we'll be in touch soon about that one. So any questions, any comments at this point, anything you want to share? Just unmute, uncloak, and speak up. Lots of quiet, dark screens out there, but they've stayed with us, so I think they've enjoyed it.
Hope so.
Anybody want to ask anything?
Maybe I could ask.
Yeah.
I'm actually in South Africa, so I'm fascinated that the dark skies is a thing in the UK, which I think of as a kind of cloudy-like place. So when you organize these events, I mean, how do you deal with the weather and the expectation around the weather? I mean, the last two events I've organized here in South Africa have been clouded out, and it's difficult to grow a business around that.
I know what you mean, Catherine. Have you ever seen Greg Quick in Australia? They refer to him as Space Gandalf.
No, I haven't.
Greg Quick. So Greg was on BBC Stargazing Live as a guest the last time they did a full series, and it was from Australia. Greg is in the Kimberley region, and he is blessed with just clear skies all the time. The way he does it is that if there is a cloudy night, people can reschedule, but actually, you know, he can do that. But in England, and I guess in South Africa, but not to the extent that we have it, you need something else. You can't build any kind of business around rescheduling people in a country where it tends to be cloudy quite a bit. Our estimates are, and I've heard people say this before at a local observatory, and I think it holds true, in our country, we get about 20% completely clear, 20% completely cloudy, and 60% somewhere in the middle. How's that for you, Catherine? Do those percentages seem true for you, or are they different?
No, well, we have a lot more clear nights than that.
Yeah,
but even, you know, if you're trying to run a business, and, you know, even if 30% of the nights are clouded out, it's quite tricky.
So number one is manage expectations. I'm about to rewrite all of our descriptions. We've done this before. Just, you know, post-COVID, we've just been fighting to fulfill demand and get people through. But I'm going to rewrite descriptions that clearly state that some nights it is cloudy. We live in the UK. And on those nights, we'll do our best to find lots of fun activities for you to do, and the event will still go ahead as long as it's safe to do so. So it's managing expectations, first of all. That's the main thing. And then people come and but most people are sensible. Most people know that sometimes it's cloudy and you can't control the weather. But if you do that up front, it takes care of things. I also offer a guarantee. So I do something, if you look at my website, starsafaris.com, called the 100-star guarantee, which is a bit of a play on words from like 5-star accommodation. That if on any given event you don't see 100 or more stars, you can complete a very short form and you'll get a discount code that allows you to come back at half price as often as you like until you see something. But as I mentioned earlier, we had to move away from things like village halls because they weren't so good on the rainy, cloudy nights. So we needed to be somewhere that was interesting to see. So if you have nice scenery and somewhere that's a bit of an adventure in its own right to go to, you know, at High Force, it's a 10-minute walk through the dark, and nobody's ever allowed to the waterfall in the dark, apart from on our event. So that's another thing. And also something that Deborah alluded to is mobile apps. So I would always build in a session to show people how to use mobile apps anyway, because they're interested in that kind of thing. But on a cloudy night, you can do more of that, and we find that helps. Sorry, I muted you there briefly because there's some background noise, but please feel free to unmute, Catherine. Or I can unmute you if you like, if you're still there. You're gone. I hope that answered your question. You can come back and speak up if you. Okay, you're back.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. Those all sound like good suggestions, and things that I think I have been using. I let people come back free if it's cloudy and still do presentation like an indoor thing.
If you think you can manage that with the level of cloudy nights, then do it. But you know, people are paying for an experience, and they're still getting an experience.
Yeah.
It's a different
the thing
kind.
is, mostly I take people far away from where they live, and so they can't come back again. So it is a bit tricky. Sorry, just one more question. I don't know if you guys have got time or whatever, but so you know, you talked about people being able to explain things. So we are very short on guides who can explain things. Do you have any kind of training programs for guides who can? Oh, you do. Okay.
I'm just going to briefly say that the reason I called the company when we restarted Star Safaris, if you saw the National Geographic article, it refers to stargazing nights, which is what I used to call it, is because I wanted to make that analogy run all the way through the core of the business with safaris. So you're in a place where people get that even more so. If you go out on a safari looking for the big 5 animals and you see none of them, that's just the way it goes. And you can come back and you can look again. But there's no guarantee you're going to see even one of those big 5 animals or any animals at all. And that's just the way it is. And that's what people have to understand about stargazing events. But in terms of training, I run a program called Making Sense of the Night Sky. Sarah Thulis, who's in this talk right now, is on the current program. We run it seasonally, and it's currently Northern Hemisphere, but I'm expanding it to Southern Hemisphere. So make sure you're on the mailing list. When I send this replay out, there'll be a little thing where you can put your email address in. I know we already have your email address and have consent to email you. But if you put your email address in there, you'll be on the mailing list. And next time it runs, I'll let you know. I mean, of course, the knowledge of the stars is only a small part of it, but we're including Southern Hemisphere now, so it includes everybody. But I have a system, which I won't go into detail now, for teaching anybody to become fully conversant with the entire night sky in any given season in 10 weeks. If you join the mailing list, I'll send you.
I also offer training with the Southern Night Sky, but I think it's pretty hard for the guides to kind of start up businesses on their own. I think, even when you know a little bit of about the sky, I think there's a gap for us between that and actually, making it into a career or a viable business.
You're absolutely right. And also the night sky training, it's about the method. It's no harder than learning where countries are on a map when you approach it correctly. But yes, at some point, we're hoping to start a longer training program to train guides, but keep on the mailing list and we'll keep you informed. And thanks for your questions.
Catherine, can I just ask, do you provide food and activities in case it is a cloudy night?
I used to provide food, but I found that the people weren't particularly interested in the food. So what I would do is do simulations on a big screen to show what the sky would look like using some stellarium and that kind of thing. Right. And then, because I am actually a scientist, I would talk about some of the kind of cutting edge research that we're doing in a sort of layman terms. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's
and
just
if they're kids, we have lots of other activities as well.
Oh, well, that's good.
Kind of model the solar system.
Yeah. Because we tended to find if we took people out onto a car park and started modeling the solar system with string and balls and oranges and things, they really enjoyed that, and it gives some really positive feedback, even if they couldn't see any of the stars in the night sky because it was so cloudy, and sometimes it was even raining. But they loved that participation, getting involved, and because they were buying it as an experience, the parents valued that as well, and they would go and stand and be the sun, they would, rather than using objects, if it was raining, they would get individuals to say, well, you're the sun and you're the moon, and they would get them stood in various parts of the car park just to illustrate distance and time. But you're obviously already doing things like that, so I was just wondering.
Some nice resources out there. The Institute of Physics, which is mostly UK based, if you look on their website, there are lots of resources for teachers. And they're very much into a maths last kind of approach, where you learn the stuff first and then add the maths in later. But lots of activities that will appeal to really young kids. Websites like Teachers Pay Teachers, where you can buy teachers' PowerPoints and lessons for next to nothing. TES Times Educational Supplement in the UK has a website as well, where teachers sell their PowerPoints and lesson plans. And very often they come with cut-out resources. The IDA, the International Dark Sky Association, has lots of resources. And also NASA's Night Sky Network.
Yeah, they do.
So they have a lot of stuff on YouTube that's about education and outreach and some good examples. And if you are a non-profit or attached to a non-profit somehow, you can join NASA's Museums Outreach, which has a lot of resources as well. But there's a lot out there if you find the right websites.
It's just knowing your audience, really. If they're not science orientated, then chucking science at them will put them off. If they are science oriented, great. But if they're not, it's just knowing your audience, knowing who's coming, what they're coming for, what's their interest.
You know what they really like on Stellarium, Catherine? You might have discovered this, the sky cultures, star lore. Do you use those where you look at the constellations of different cultures?
Yes, a little bit. Of course, the African culture star lore is very rich as well. So yeah, I definitely include some of that. Yeah, but I also like to kind of show how people's star signs have actually changed using Stellarium. Show that the sun, you might think you're a Virgo, but the sun's actually in Leo when you were born, that kind of thing. Yeah, I find people really, really go for that. Yeah.
That's exactly it. Meet people where they are, which has been a big topic on Deborah's presentation.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Were there any other questions from anyone? Sarah Thulis, I'm pleased you enjoyed it. Something in chat there.
I've got a quick question for you.
Hi, Julie.
Hello. So yeah, I'm up in Scotland in Calendar, and so you were saying, so we still use community halls and bits and pieces for stuff generally, but I'm interested in the approach that you don't use them at all. So you don't have access to any facilities. You're just outside, and if the weather's bad, you're just outside in bad weather.
No, we have facilities.
Yeah.
So the High Force Hotel, which is where we're based, we have some space in the lower bar where we can get everybody in and put a screen up and do a presentation, and we do longer if the weather's bad. But during COVID, when I said we were able to open in September, October last year briefly, we went over to Zoom presentations. So when we could do outdoor only, or if we were using a location where there was no indoor space, we'd do a briefing on Zoom and then meet up on another night and do the outdoor thing. So that's another option.
Okay.
And in Dumfries and Galloway, we have the visitors centres. So we would always start in a visitors centre with a nice roaring log fire, hot drinks and sandwiches. They didn't pay a great deal of money, and then they would go outside.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. Our discovery sites aren't really need any facilities, so it's just trying to manage like how you have an indoor space that you can use and then get people to the discovery sites. But yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you're somewhere potentially really bleak, you definitely need an indoor space. Nobody wants to stand on the moors getting rained on for an hour and a half.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I have a question. First of all, I see you recorded this.
Yes.
Can you send this link to me? Because I'm the president of a local astronomy club in North Carolina. And this is an excellent talk on how to teach our members and how to talk with our hosts, our guests that come. Because we don't want to, one of our local planetarium folks, you don't want to sit there and say, this is M57, it's over here and everything. You give them all the mumbo jumbo and they walk away going, huh? So it's more important to say, this is the Ring Nebula, it's in Lyra, it's close to the star Vega, and you give them the information and they take away more from that. And that sometimes you do spark a fire in a young growing teenager that is amazing. So so I just want to make sure I can get a hold of this talk and use it as a club event for us, one of our club meetings.
Absolutely.
It'd be very handy.
It's Jamie, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Hi, Jamie. Yeah, great. That was the purpose of recording it. We recorded the one earlier today, and I'm going to edit together the best of both. The presentations were the same thing, but obviously there are different questions, so we'll add both sets of questions. And then as far as I'm concerned, you can do what you want with it.
That's great. Thank you very much. This is a great event.
You're welcome. Thank you. We spend a lot of time communicating science to people who don't really want the science. And it goes way back to the observatory for me, where I would show somebody, for instance, the Ring Nebula, and say any questions. And the first one was always, or almost always, what constellation is it in? And that's because people relate to that stuff. That's what they know. So the teacher in me knows that the way that you get people from where they are to where you want them to be is you scaffold the knowledge. So you work out what they have already and you give them something in their terms that'll just build on that. So I always begin with constellations, and the same as what Debbie was talking about. People love the zodiac constellations and they love to know how to find them. And of course, once you can tell them that they're all in a line and where they appear, then that's 12 constellations they can watch out for. And they just love that stuff. They like the stories as well. So yeah, absolutely, definitely. I'm pleased you enjoyed it, and we will edit this together. I'll hopefully have something to send out by Monday. I'll have a look at it over the weekend. If not Monday, then Tuesday.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gary, just one comment.
Hey, David.
Hi. Two things. To anybody else here, I don't recognize any of the other names, but I'm not part of, I joined and I'm delighted to be part of Gary's online course every Thursday. So I thoroughly recommend it. He's a great teacher, and you haven't paid me a penny to say that, Gary. I know.
Thanks, Dave.
The question really is, for Sunday, you were going to let me have details on Stellarium on the phones for people. So
Yes, I am.
if you can do that, that'd be great. But I enjoyed this. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to hear, but it's been interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. We love Stellarium. If you don't have Stellarium, I recommend you get it. Have most of you heard of it? It's a piece of planetarium software.
And it's free.
Just start it up. So there's plenty of planetarium software out there, but Stellarium is good partly because of the development that goes on. It's very much in favor with academics, and they just develop it for free, but also free is the price. And I think free is a good price, especially when you're dealing with amateurs and you want to do community work. Let me just quickly find Stellarium. You all see that okay? Piece of free planetarium software. So this is already going to show me what I could see if I looked south tonight, but you can add the constellations in. It's very useful for doing constellation tours. You can zoom in and out. And you can zoom right in to detail like nebulae and galaxies and show people what they could see even through a pair of binoculars. And one of those things I always show people is the Andromeda galaxy, which at this kind of latitude is visible pretty much all year round. The next galaxy to the Milky Way, 2.5 million light years away, and you can see it like that through a pair of average binoculars. But it's the constellations people enjoy, and one of the lovely features in here that academics keep contributing to is a thing called star law. So star law, sky stories, sky constellations, sky cultures. Let's put the Arabic one on. So you get totally different artwork, but you notice already, if you know anything about the constellations, in the Arabic night sky, it's the exact same things, they just have different names, sometimes slightly different. So Cygnus the swan becomes the hen, Pegasus is the great horse. It's not that far removed. And that's because the system that we have, we like to think of it as Greek, and it kind of is, but the Greeks borrowed it because you can't even see all of these constellations from Greece, ancient or modern. So people set about using software like this to find out where you could see them from, and it was modern day Iraq, that kind of area, Mesopotamia, Babylon and Sumer. So a couple of thousand years before we had the Greek constellations, these were already in existence. So many lovely things. There's a new one come up, which is Arminche Cave in Spain. So it shows a Paleolithic cave paintings and how they line up. The Chinese one is very busy. It would take hours to unpack this. Completely different. And before I was an astronomer, I was a psychologist and an anthropologist. So I just love this kind of thing. I think the perspective that you can give people by saying, hey, look, you know, these things that we talk about and you know them and they've been there forever. Well, they haven't. And there's lots of different cultures have different ideas about what they should be. And here's just some of them, and you can watch them in real time. There's also an app. So there's an app for Stellarium. There's a free version, but the premium version isn't that much, about $15, about £12. But it has all of these in real time. So you can look, for instance, at the Navajo sky culture, the Ojibwe sky culture if you're in North America. And the artwork is just stunning.
Yeah.
So you can do events where people can start to learn that other cultures have totally different ways of looking at everything, as we all know, of course, but the stars are a gateway to that as well. But they're the kind of things I enjoy. Yes, I like the actual stars. I like what you can see with the naked eye, binoculars and a telescope, but I love the stories, and I just love that little shift you get in people. when you tell them something they didn't know before. Another favorite of mine is to start off with how light travels, and then to talk about how long it takes to travel from the moon, like Deborah had in her presentation, then from the sun, and then using that to talk about light years and what it actually is, and just go out and out and out to the Andromeda galaxy beyond that. And then to show people, some of you may have seen these before, the Hubble Deep Field images, where the original one from 1995 has 3,000 galaxies, all different colors, shapes, and sizes, in an area the size of a pinhead at arm's length, a 24 millionth of the whole sky, and there's 3,000 galaxies. Then they followed it up with one that was a 26 millionth of the sky from Earth, with 10,000 galaxies. So when you tell people what a galaxy is and then you build up from there, this is just the kind of thing you need to blow people's minds before you take them outside. So I'm always, rather than trying to bog people down with facts, to build them up and elicit a state of awe and wonder and that kind of thing, and then I take them outside and let them enjoy the night sky. Any other questions before we finish? Just unmute if you have something. Going once. Going twice. Looks like, oh, David, did you have something else? Or were you just muting to say something?
Just waiting to say thank you when anybody else did.
You're welcome. Well, that's a good place to end then. You are very welcome, David. There have been people on this call from all over the place. I looked at the list of invitees that had registered. There were people from Canada, the USA, South Africa, and this morning we had Australia, and of course the UK. So it's been a great mix. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'll get the recording out to you next week sometime, and we'll reach out to you about things like the summit and any future talks we do. I'm thinking of following up with one on astrophotography, so people can learn even on smartphones how to photograph venues, to help spread the word about what a nice area you live in and the dark skies that you work under. Take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was very interesting.
I'm pleased you enjoyed it.